Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Robin O'Hara, and with me tonight is Adrian Karamihas in the back. We're both from the Division of Capital Planning. Here for the presentation of the options for Somerset and Westbrook. Let me make sure I'm doing this correctly. Hold on. The clicker doesn't want to advance. Sorry. I thought I turned it on. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so this evening we'll do a little bit of review for those who attended the first public information meeting. A reminder, if anyone has a question, to write it down on their 3x5 card, and if they need a 3.5x5 card, 3x5 card, raise your hand and one will come to you. When you have a question that's already written and you want it picked up, raise it up and someone will come and collect it. And we'll do questions and answers at the end. All right. We'll review the policy factors, the guiding parameters, look at the current information, which is sort of why we are here, and then the presentation of the options. So as a reminder, on November 26, 2019, the board adopted a resolution that got us going on the boundary study that we're involved in. Somerset is overcrowded and projected to be overcrowded for the 6-year planning period, and enrollment is projected to increase. There's a capital project at Westbrook, but more importantly, it has space. So you have two adjacent schools, one that's over capacity and the other one that has space. And the board resolution says that the study should be completed during the spring, and the board action will be in November of 2020. So we're guided in the boundary study process by 4 planning factors, and policy FAA is the policy that we're governed by. And these 4 factors include demographic characteristics of student populations, geography, stability of school assignment over time, and facility utilization. So, in addition to those policy factors, we have guiding parameters for the option development. In this boundary study, we are only using 3 policy factors: demographic characteristics of student population, geography, and facility utilization. We don't need to consider the stability factor in this boundary study because there have been no recent boundary studies that would affect students residing in this area. And that's really what that stability factor is. You try not to affect the same student in a short period of time from one school level to the next. We are trying to maintain walkers, so we'll go over the map and show them the walk zones for the 2 schools involved. And this last factor on grandfathering, it is typical that the rising 5th graders would be grandfathered and allowed to complete where they start. Ultimately, it is up to the Board of Education to, in their resolution, what sort of grandfathering they will adopt. So now to go over to review the current information. So the orangish area is your Somerset zones, your Somerset boundary, current existing Somerset boundary, and the greenish area is the Westbrook boundary. And part of our process, we look at smaller pieces of geography that we consider during the boundary reassignment process, and it's how we come up with options. So we've named these various zones. The S1, for example, is the Somerset Walk Zone. We also have, in addition to being able to find this presentation online, by the way, we also have some hard copy maps up here that you can look at after the meeting if you want to see up close what they are. So briefly, as I said, S1 is the Somerset Walk Zone. S2 is the Friendship Village area, the Geico property, and Willard Avenue Park. S3 is the area bound by Wisconsin Avenue to the west, Oliver Street to the north, Cedar Parkway to the northeast, and Western Avenue to the southeast. It's considered a portion of the Chevy Chase Section 1A. S4 is River Road, starting at River Road at Ogden Drive, across the Kenwood Golf and Country Club to rear property lines of Chamberlain Avenue, to Glenbrook Road to the north, Glenbrook Road to Little Falls Parkway to the east, River Road to the southwest. It's essentially the Kenwood neighborhood, Kenwood apartments, and Kenwood condominium area. S5 is Little Falls Parkway to Glenbrook Road to the east, Bradley Boulevard to the north. The fields, it crosses Bradley Boulevard to include the fields of Bethesda north of Bradley Boulevard. It crosses over at Arlington Road back to Bradley Boulevard. And then it takes the Capitol Crescent Trail to the east. S6 is bound by the Capitol Crescent Trail to the west, Bradley Boulevard to the north, Wisconsin Avenue to the east, Norwood Park to the south, and across to Little Falls Parkway at Hillendale Road. And S7, Wisconsin Avenue to the west, across the Golf Club to Cedar Parkway to the east, and Oliver Street to the south. And it's considered portions of Chevy Chase Sections 1A and 2. And then finally, S8, Little Falls Branch to the west and north, Wisconsin Avenue to the east, Somerset Terrace across to Little Falls Branch to the south, and is the Somerset House condominiums area. The Westbrook boundary is only broken into 3 zones, and part of that is that these options don't include moving kids out of Westbrook, just rather than going the other way. But very easily, the area north of River Road, the area between River Road and Mass Avenue, and then the area south of Mass Avenue. So again, to review the current situation, which is the why was this started to begin with, and that's that Somerset is projected to continuously be overutilized for the planning period, and Westbrook is continued to have space projected available. So staff has come up with 3 different options, and when we look at these options, we will refer to the zones that we're looking at to come from Somerset to Westbrook. So in option 1, we're looking at zones S2 and S3 from Somerset to Westbrook. Each of the options has an effects table. These are what we call effects tables. Similar to the one of current situation, this one now looks at what would happen if these pieces of geography are reassigned. So in option 1, we look at the before and after. The top line of each one looks at the number of students projected with no change, and then the second section is with change. So with change, with zones S2 and S3 reassigned, Somerset will go from having a deficit of 78 students in the out year, which is the 25-26 school year, to having a surplus of 60 students. And Westbrook would go from having a surplus of 290 students, seats, to 152 seats available, or being at about 75% utilized. Somerset would be at 88% utilization. On the right-hand side of the chart, we're looking at the race-ethnic composition as well as the farms and ESOL data. So this is these are the demographic characteristics of students. And again, you can see where they start and what would happen. Now, I should say we don't project these numbers. These are, if it were to happen today, using those students, what would the results be? So, for example, at Somerset, the current farms would be 7.7, or is 7.7%. With this option, it would increase, the farms level would increase to 9.8%. Westbrook would go from 1.2% farms to 1.8% farms, as an example. So I'm going to go to option 2. Now in option 2, we're looking at reassigning S4 from Somerset to Westbrook. So that's the west of Little Falls Parkway, as well as S2, which is the apartment buildings just north of and including the Geico property. In this option, again, looking at the out years, we see that Somerset ends up with approximately 68 seats available, or a utilization of 87%. You can see the changes in race ethnic. Farms, again, goes to about 9.3%. ESOL goes up, actually declines to 15.2%. At Westbrook, the utilization in the out year, 25-26, goes to 77%. The farms level is at 2.2% and ESOL at 13.1%. In option 3, we're looking at reassigning S4 and S5 from Somerset to Westbrook. Looking at the effects table for option 3, you see that Somerset ends up with a utilization of 92% and Westbrook 72%. The farms and at Somerset declines to 4.5%. It increases at Westbrook to 6.2%. ESOL at Somerset declines slightly to 17.6%. It increases at Westbrook to 10.4%. Now, a survey similar to the last couple of boundary studies that we have done, we have a survey that will be posted online as soon as all the translations are ready. We're anticipating that sometime at the later part of next week. You can look, the survey will be available at the Planning Department website, and it will be under the Somerset Westbrook link. There will be another link there to get onto the online survey. The survey is limited, one per IP address. So if your student does it on your home computer, the parent can do it on his or her phone, or at a work computer or something like that. So these are the currently scheduled meetings. We're at the second checkbox, January 30th. There will be a presentation just like this one next week on February 5th, where again we'll present the options that have been developed so far. If for any reason that gets snowed out, we still have February 6th for a snow date. If needed, there are already meeting dates scheduled for a second round of options, February 18th and 19th, snow date on February 20th, and then, if you could write it down, and then on February 26th, the second public information meeting. All the meetings are scheduled for here. After all these meetings, what happens? Well, there's a report that is developed, and in mid-July, that boundary report would be released. During the summer, the superintendent reviews that report and other input received. In October, somewhere thereabouts, the superintendent would release a recommendation, and the Board of Education would review, have public hearing and decision-making in November of 2020. If you have questions written down on your 3x5 card, if you could hold them up, and Adrian will come around and pick them up, and we can get ready for the question and answer period. Just going to gather them. All right, so now we're at questions. Do you want to field them, or you want me to?
Start. Okay. Let me know when you get tired.
Okay. All right. So this first question is, how are walk zones determined? So the walk zones are actually determined by the Department of Transportation, the MCPS Department of Transportation. So they assign each student as a MCPS assigned walker or a bus rider. It says Friendship Village is very much walkable to Somerset. Again, if it's not determined by the Department of Transportation, then we have to go by what they say. What will happen at a second public information meeting? So the second public information meeting we will go over any of the results from the survey. Let's see what else. We'll talk about next steps again.
It's It's really a review of what we've done thus far. So if there is a second round, we would go through that. We would give a summary of the first round of options, again, next steps, and answer any other questions. If people hadn't participated before, it gives people an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the process. It's really just a wrap-up, is what it is.
Do you expect there to be a second round of options? I don't know yet. I mean,
So part of the process that we have now is looking at the survey, hearing any feedback that we get on your cards, questions that you may have that will allow us to take a second look if we need to do more options. So that's part of the process. So we don't know exactly now whether there will be. As staff, we looked at options that we thought were viable options, but sometimes something happens, whether in a survey or in feedback, that makes us take another look and see whether or not we need to do something more. So stay tuned. Here's one more.
okay. Let's see. Under all options, Westbrook will continue to have excess capacity. What consideration will be given to any future additions to Westbrook's footprint? So right now, Westbrook has something called a shell space. It's an unfinished, it's got the exterior walls, but not interior. So any additional space is actually fitting out that shell. So it's not actually building any additional footprint. And it would be done as needed, I guess, and as money available. That's always key.
So those projected numbers, were those like the school without the shelled out addition done? Because I know originally it was saying you guys were going to do that in 2021 before the changes, or are those like the 70%, the projected?
That actually includes the build-out. Yes.
So if you look at the options, if you have them with you now, or they are online, you can look. If you go to one of those pages where it has the reassignment, this chart, you can see it shows right here in the top left of the bottom box for Westbrook, it has the capacity. So that capacity is how we calculated the utilization, and that's the capacity for the recommended fit out of the shell. So what we always say with capital projects is until the shovel's in the ground, it is recommended, it's part of the superintendent's and the board's request, but we have to get funded first, and we have to go through that process. The county executive made his recommendation for MCPS, and so we have to see how that goes through the process at the county council. We won't know what we're actually funded until the county council acts, which is usually the end of May. If you could put it on a card.
The only way to keep through and actually keep track of all the questions being asked is to have them on the card. It really does help us keep track of the questions. Okay, what's the clarification?
So the thought was there will continue to be excess capacity at Westbrook, opening it up to future expansion of the boundaries, changing some of the potential projected demographics that you have in the projections. What consideration, if any, would be given to that possibility as part of this process?
So as part of this process, we're not looking beyond Somerset and Westbrook. That the resolution is just Somerset and Westbrook. Yes. Every year, we reevaluate enrollment projections, we look at capacities and make adjustments as needed and make recommendations as needed. But this particular process, as the resolution states, is only Somerset and Westbrook. Okay, so this question is, how will the board evaluate the transportation implications of the options? For example, if an option bifurcates a neighborhood that relies on one bus such that it would need two buses, how would that be evaluated? Question 2 on the back. Sorry. Okay, so the Department of Transportation will actually evaluate when it gets to that point what the transportation considerations will be, whether additional walkers will be there or additional bus riders will be there, or what sort of bus routes that they need to do. Again, they reevaluate these things every time there's a boundary change. And make adjustments as necessary. They want to make sure that students are doing a safe walking distance, and they make adjustments as necessary.
So the only thing that I would say is, a lot of people ask us this question, like, what's the impact on transportation, which of course is an operating budget cost. In these options, there are no walkers that are going to become bus riders. So in that respect, the impact is always minimal if you're not adding to the bus riders. It could mean that a bus may be going a little bit further, which could have an impact on the gas, which is minimal, as opposed to needing an extra bus to transport 50 more kids or 60 more kids. So in that regard, that isn't the issue here. It is just a modification, which could, again, mean possibly more gas. And transportation, as Robin said, does take a look at it once we get through this first process to figure out what that implication would be. Usually during the superintendent's review, he will usually ask that question, or we will provide that information to the superintendent. So that's a piece of information that we provide, as well as all the other information that we provide.
Okay. How does a second round of options get triggered? I do not like the options presented tonight. There will always be someone not thrilled with what's being presented. A second round of options, for example, when we just completed a large boundary study up in the Up County area, 3 high schools, 5 middle schools. During that process, what we found was that there was some new information that we were not aware of that made what are currently bus riders, it was going to make them future walkers. And once we found out that there were future walkers, we didn't want to move them as future walkers. A project was in the books and actually getting started. It was funded, so it was going to happen. It wasn't just something that someone said would happen one day. It was, and because of that, that triggered another set of options that we opened up, and that's what triggered a second set of options. It's not usually just because someone doesn't like what's presented. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
So the only thing that I would add to that is the survey will go up, and the survey does ask questions. There will not be any open-ended questions in the survey. They are multiple that you just answer A, B, or C, or 1, 2, and 3. We have our comments, our pink sheets. If you would like to share something that would help us or guide us if we hear, again, that something may make more sense or something that we may have overlooked, we will certainly consider that. But as Robin indicated in the past, it really is something that we either weren't aware of or something that was really significantly overlooked that we needed to take a second look. And again, we won't know that until we hear from the community, we see the survey, and we as staff will go back and look at it one more time again as well.
What was the thinking behind dividing S3 and S7 into 2 sections? Oliver Street is not a major road, it is one neighborhood, all part of Chevy Chase Village. So Dividing geography into smaller components is always a challenge, and looking at the various roads and riverbeds and Capitol Crescent Trail and things like that, we did try to get geography that was identifiable. So Oliver Street was splitting that neighborhood in half, partly because it was, the northern portion was directly across from Somerset. And it seemed to want to stay there geographically. That doesn't mean it couldn't be part of what's going south to Westbrook, but the other component of that was that taking all of that geography would actually move too many students. So that was another reason why that was divided in half, because S2 plus S3 plus S7 would have been too many students to move. So that's one of the reasons why that was divided off that way. But anyone who goes through redistricting and trying to come up with the appropriate pieces of geography, it is a challenging task, and you try to make it so that it's understandable, and it can be frustrating for those who are just across the line or whatever. Let's see here. Okay, each option shows 2 zones being reassigned. Is it possible to see the impact of reassigning single zones, essentially decoupling of the zones being highlighted for reassignment? The walk zone for Somerset seems arbitrary. Homes in zone S3 and S7 are quite close to the school, and many families walk. How is that determined? We already went over the transportation reasons for that. The walk zones are actually determined by the Office of Transportation, not by us. And it is a combination, the walk zones are determined by a combination of distance. So at elementary school, I believe it's 1 mile, but it's also certain things they can't cross. So it's a safe walking distance, the presence of sidewalks, whether or not there's a crossing guard, whether it's a major highway or divided highway and things like that. As for seeing each of the zones individually, that's not being shown here because it wasn't necessary for the options development. Whether that could be done, in some cases it can, in some cases it cannot. And the reason why it cannot is that if the number of students within a zone is under a certain amount, there are privacy concerns. So I know of at least one of the zones where I wouldn't be able to do that because there are too few students in that zone. Of the 3 factors, utilization, demographics, and geography, are they treated with equal weight? Is one more important to MCPS than the others? We treat them as equally weighted.
So none of the factors are weighted. I know that there has been much conversation about this. As staff, we have 4 factors. And what we try to do is advance those factors to the best of our ability in each of those options. There absolutely will be, because nothing is perfect, one option that may advance one of the factors better than the other, and vice versa. Our ultimate goal is to advance all of the options in an option, all of the factors in an option, that becomes the best option, but when we're looking at it as a staff, we are trying to create options that advance the factors. So in this boundary study, we're working with a very small geography because we're only working with 2 schools. In our other one, we had many options because we were working with so many more schools, such a bigger piece of geography. And so we'll take a look at it again, but we look at the factors and try to advance those factors in the options. Here, you can take this one. I'm going to take this one.
Will 5th graders grandfathered at Somerset receive bus service? And the answer is yes. Grandfathered students do receive bus service. How many seats are attributable to the build-out of the Westbrook shell space? I think it's 60, right?
So it's about 3 classrooms. So if our classrooms are about 25, and that's its capacity, not how many kids are in there every year, but the way that we rate our schools, it's about 25, so it would be about 75. It's about not about 3 classrooms, it's 3 classrooms. That's what the shell is.
Why not keep current families in their current schools so families do not have children in multiple schools? So whenever there's a boundary change, there is a phasing of process as we phase kids from one school to the next. If you grandfather the 5th graders, then it's a 1-year transition. If you're to start grandfathering your kindergartners, then you're talking a 6-year transition of trying to provide transportation, of all of that. And yes, you might have students in 2 different schools. I'm a mother of 3 and at one time had kids in 3 different schools, so I understand that. But it is, there has to be a transition period, and that transition period has to be as short as possible, otherwise it's not very effective. To what extent will logistics of dividing a neighborhood be taken into account, including the fact that a small geographic area in the same neighborhood would consequently be divided into 3 separate elementary schools, resulting in further loss of community, ability to consolidate buses, etc.? So I'm not sure which zone they're considering, or this question is considering being divided 3 ways, but are you talking the apartments?
Chevy Chase Village is already divided, and its part goes to Rosemary Hills.
Okay.
And so now that any further division would result in a very small area going to 3 elementary schools.
So I guess what I say with boundary changes is that it's never a child going by him or herself to the new school. It's the piece of geography is all going. That whole area is going to be going from one school to the next. So lines have to be drawn somewhere. And if you had a huge area, say in Clarksburg, for example, there would be no way that every child residing in Clarksburg could attend one school. There's just simply not enough capacity at one school to do that. So likewise, we have to, as a school system, we have school sites that exist wherever they exist, each with capacity of a certain amount, and we have population that we're trying to fit into each of these buildings. And because we don't have nice, neat packages of 600 students fitting in this piece of geography that fit into one elementary school, these lines have to be drawn somewhere. So I know it may not be the answer that you want to hear, but how is proposed development or growth considered? Are there planned redevelopments for high-density housing in any of the S or W regions? We do look at pipeline data. That's development that's in the pipeline. Right now, there's the Geico property that could potentially have 500 units in it, but it's been on the books since 1998 and nothing has happened. And they're multifamily units, which wouldn't result in a huge number of students. But again, there's been no movement on that development since 1998. The West Bar development is actually not within this boundary area, so that would not affect this boundary at the moment. And then other than that, there are some smaller redevelopment, but they're more like tear down and rebuild of existing small single families. If I remember correctly, there may be one other possible development within that area. But anyway, it is looked at and it is considered as part of the projections. That's been answered. Now going backwards. Okay, Adrian, you had a question you wanted to answer? Yeah. And we'll collect the last of these questions.
So I'll take this one because I did the calculation. Somebody asked, if the Westbrook Shell expansion is not funded, what does the Westbrook capacity look like 3 to 5 years out? So if you look in our CIP, you can actually see that. As I said, it's about 75 seats. So at the end of the 6 years, which is what we look at for capacity, there will be 222 seats still available at Westbrook without the build out of the shell. Okay. You can finish these two.
Given that the walk from Friendship Heights to Somerset is heavily utilized by students, will there be an option for a crossing guard on River Road so that our children can continue to safely walk to school if they chose to? It's good exercise. I agree, I like walking. However, the decision to do that is a combination with, it's actually the police department that issues the crossing guards, right? And so that would be a discussion between them and I guess the Department of Transportation. When will data projections on busing impact and cost be released? In time for public meetings, comment period in February. So costs won't be. We could potentially do transportation times. I think we did that in the past.
Sorry.
That's all right.
We could provide, based upon the options, we can provide what we call average travel times. So it'll be from an area, from a zone to then the new zone. That's something we can definitely do and we can put on the website. So just to clarify the public meetings, I wasn't sure what you meant by that. So we do have potentially second round of options. And we would be presenting that second round of options. And then we have our last public information meeting. So this doesn't go in front of the board until next October when the superintendent releases, and then there's a public hearing process. So I just wanted to make sure that people weren't confused about what this process is and when we end with the last public meeting, and then what that next process is, as Robin said, is in the slide about review by the superintendent, release the superintendent's recommendation in the end of October, and then the board starts their review process. So I hope that clarifies.
I think that's the last question.
Are there any more? Oh, there's one in the back. Any other questions? It wouldn't, it would just, because that is an evaluated, the Department of Transportation evaluates routes every year. That is part of their process every year. So until a decision is made by the board, recommended by the superintendent and then made by the board, would they actually start that route process to evaluate what the routes would be. Again, as far as impact on the operating budget, it will be minimal because we aren't recommending any walkers become bus riders. But that evaluation happens once the board would make their determination. And again, that's something that transportation does every year. Did you grab that last one? Oh, did you put it here?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is actually, you can answer this.
Oh. With regard to the Westbard property, I believe those students would go to Wood Acres. Would you consider the impact on Wood Acres as well, given that Westbrook is an adjacent school and could also be considered for overflow, given it's underutilized? It's my understanding that this property will be developed over the next 5 years. So every year, actually twice a year, we look at projections, and part of the projections process is taking into account the development that's in the pipeline. And once we've got the projections and we look at them in comparison to the capacity available, we might make a recommendation in the capital improvement plan to do a boundary change. That's sort of how we got here. And so that's something that we look at every year. Would this, in some point in the future, would Woodacre and Somerset or Westbrook be involved in another boundary change? Potentially, but that is not what we're talking about today. Today we're just talking about these two schools. But again, we would review all the data that's available and the new projections when they come out in the capital improvement plan. And again, we change projections for the master plan as well, the 1 year. And it's just part of the standard process. I think that's the last question. I think I have one more, let's see. Yes, these are just the websites that are available that we were talking about. One is the Division of Capital Planning website, and then under that you'll find the Somerset Westbrook Boundary Study link. And it will be under that second link that you'll find another link where the online survey will be. And we're anticipating that to go up during next week in the later part of the week. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight.
If I can just add also, so if we are not coming up with a second round of options, then the meetings, that next group of meetings, we won't be holding. So we will send out a Connect Ed, but we will also put it on our website. So please, look before you show up for that meeting, just in case you didn't get a Connect Ed. And just to make sure the meeting is still on, we will post it if they are canceled, because we are not coming up with a second round of options. And again, the survey will be up. This live stream, if you know anyone who's interested that didn't get to come today, won't be able to come the 5th. When's the next one? The 5th. This one will go online, again, at our website, that you can find it on our website as well. Okay? I think with that, we are done. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.